Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to give a talk here on our ongoing research on digital sovereignty in public domains like education, health, and so on. The title of my presentation, I don't know if there are any avid readers of the New York Times here in the audience. The New York Times, yeah, the journal. 1, 2. So then you may have come across this article, How the Netherlands Are Taming Big Tech. It's from 2023. It's a very positive article where Dutch privacy negotiators have, basically forced Google, Microsoft, and Zoom on their knees, and they had to conform to the GDPR, so the European Data Protection Law. Okay, what was this negotiation about? I mean, I'm going to be positive about this, but also a bit critical, like you intended the session to be critical. So what were these negotiations about? Well, the first part of my talk, I want to show what actually the problem was where negotiation was needed. And it's about digitalization in the education sector, where there's a strong presence of big tech companies. There's the GDPR breach problems, and there are also other dangers of what we might call sphere transgression and agenda setting. I will explain later on what is meant by these terms. Now then I come to a critical discussion, does this solution work, and then I have an outlook discussion part. Okay, just to start with a school class of the 19th century, and let's say here modern school classes, just to show that education is not a solid state thing. It develops over time in response to changes in society. And although I'm going to be a little bit critical in this talk, we at Rathenau are very much pro-change and also pro-use of technology, if only this is driven by the right purposes, so to speak. So not just through techno-optimism of techno-solutionism, but really to, in the case of education, in order to improve the quality of education and, use pedagogical, didactical insights that show actually that this is an improvement. So this is the goal, right? And unfortunately, the other drivers are also there, and we need to find, I think, a good balance. So what are we actually talking about? Well, this here, we see all these children here behind tablets and stuff like that. So this is really a big thing in education, digitalization. It plays out on at least 3 levels. It is in teaching material, but all kinds of new teaching material like interactive, multimedia, adaptive, with a lot of AI in it, social robots, VR, and so on and so forth. But digitalization also plays, let's say, on a management level with education management tools like kind of general platforms in which manage all kinds of data of students, but also all kind of contact possibilities, which gives learning analytics possibilities through AI and so on and so forth. But it even involves also the organization of education. You get new forms of education through digital means. Like modularization of course material, you can learn at a distance, you don't have to be in a classroom. That is all kinds of different things. Even evaluation of, let's say, efforts by students can change due to digitalization, because you can measure, let's say, incremental improvement, which is called formative evaluation. We don't have to do kind of summative evaluation anymore. And then finally, what this talk will be about is the increased role of private parties into this public domain. So let's look at the presence of the big tech companies in the education sector in the Netherlands. I think Microsoft, Google, and Apple almost completely dominate a part of this market. In terms of platforms, we see here numbers from research done in 2021. I have been looking for more recent numbers, but couldn't find them. But I think it is it's very much the same. Maybe there's within the tree there are slight changes, but not the overall picture has not changed. And PE is actually primary education, primary school, and secondary education is SE. So you see that Microsoft is very, very strong presence, almost 80% in the platform part, but also Google G Suite for Education. I know, you know what this is, or this is a very general package where you can have a lot of tools into one thing. Apple has its own platform, and also in terms of devices, there's not just on the software part, but also the hardware part. They control all of the market. And if some addition goes over 100%, which smart people have already seen, then you know that it's not a mistake, but they use more than one platform at the school. So big tech dominate this part of the market. And where do we find this power? And it really taps in well to the infrastructure comments you made in the keynote lecture. So this is the platform tree from a paper by José van Dijk, a famous professor in the Netherlands, at least, on digital issues. And she actually says that the power of the big tech companies is concentrated here in the middle of the tree. It's like the fluid of the lifeline of the tree. It goes from, let's say, some basic infrastructure, and everything has to go through this part. And here we find mail and messaging services, social networking, data analytics, web browsers, infrastructure services, search engines. And most of these are controlled by big tech companies. And even with the presence in the education sector. So if you come to the domains, it's more like sector-specific apps, let's say the learning material I showed. But even that is dependent on, in important ways, on this kind of middle field. So we see an increasing dominance from this dominance into these, let's say, sector-specific apps. And so this is the place in the infrastructure. So, and then another researcher from University of Nijmegen, Tamar Sharon, she coined the term sphere transgression, that the danger of this development is that experts from the private tech sector are becoming also dominant in these public sectors. And they bring these, let's say, business-oriented and also technological, data-oriented values into a domain that is not primarily business and does not have, let's say, the data framing of problems and solutions first and foremost on their minds. And that may lead to erosion of key values and also quality of the function of these domains. Examples in the education sector are the increasing reliance on predictive learning analytics. So you actually predict what a student will going to do on a particular field or subject, and then you gear, let's say, the approach towards the student based on that prediction. But the prediction is also always a percentage. So what if you fall in the 45% group or in the 73% group? I mean, how do you come from this, let's say, general statements to individuals, and doesn't this really narrow down, let's say, the options of development of learning? I mean, it's not a straight line often learning. It has bumps and roads, and it's not. It does not really square well with this data-oriented approach. That's just one example. Well, in the interest of time, I go on. So this is often heard that privacy violation is here actually a business model. So there's a very alarming study by Human Rights Watch on 49 countries. I have the details here. 160 educational technology products, 90% of them violated privacy law. And most involve the share of data with third parties. So these products monitor children, in most cases secretly, without the consent of children and their parents. In many cases, harvesting data on who they are, where they are, what they do in the classroom, who their family and friends are, what kind of device their family could afford them to use them. So they combine it with all kind of socio-economical data, and then try to well, make people more dependent on these products, but also connected to business models. So it's quite a serious problem. And well, and then the final point is about this quality of education. So when the technological experts get to lead. So they even have a dashboard in which they monitor at the University of Nijmegen how far the sphere transgression goes. And it changes all the time. So I stopped it here. You can follow a timeline. And the more red, the more dependent these public domains become on big tech companies. And well, the quality of education point is another example of this sphere transgression. More and more schools are proudly coming out to the world and say, we are a Google school or we are an Apple school. Teachers are trained to by Apple and Google to use their products, but are Apple and Google the ones to decide on good education, or should it be a public thing? I think it's a very serious problem and has not been answered yet, at least not in the Netherlands. Okay, now let's look at back to the New York Times. Also, with this Human Rights Watch research in mind, there's actually a GDPR breach was found by a DPIA, a Data Protection Impact Assessment, on this Google Workspace product. And this revealed 10 high and 3 low privacy risks, unspecified purpose, lack of transparency, unlawful process of data. These are some of the problems that are found in this DPIA. And there was a strong advice of some authoritarian body in the Netherlands called the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens, the authority of personal data, to break with Google. So quit with the products. It's not according to the law. And that brought Google, let's say, to the negotiation table. And Microsoft and Zoom were quickly joined into this negotiation process. Then 2 intermediate ICT organizations called SURF and Civon. SURF is more for higher education and Civon for primary and secondary education. They do collective buying, so collective supply is organized around these 2 organizations. And they started to negotiate with the big tech. And then in the course of, I'd say, 2022, an agreement was made, and at the end of the year, that was embraced by the country and also the government. So the Netherlands did not follow France and Germany in a ban on Microsoft products in the education sector in the beginning of 2023. Also, the moment when the New York Times article appeared, some politicians proudly present themselves on television and in newspapers. Well, we are good, doing well, and the other countries are not. They need to follow us. Yet, it turns out that not all risk had been mitigated. And this requires a new round of negotiation, and it lasted the whole of 2023. And then they came up with, in July, but then there were amendments and still changes. So at the end of 2023, they had a new terms of service. Turns out, a year later, that another extension was needed in this terms of service. And then in December last year, finally, a strong advice not to use Microsoft Copilot. So this is like a generative AI tool of Microsoft. So you see that there's constant renegotiation and let's say a leaking boat that is, all the leaks are, let's say, closed, and then you discover another leak and you have to go there as well, and it goes on and on and on. It seems to be never finished. So is this a success story? Well, partly yes, of course. It turns out that this joint cooperations are really a strong force into negotiation. I think a single school or even a big university doesn't have enough muscle to really get something done. And various forms of data collection and processing are indeed stopped. And a few important privacy law breaches are prohibited. Yet, a number of problems clearly remain. First of all, the agreement leaves a lot to be handled by the users of the educational platforms themselves. And they need to have good behavior, and so even some concrete actions to turn some things off in the systems and forbid some particular uses of it. and make their own impact analysis and make this adjustment. Thank you. There are some tools have been developed to assist people working in the schools. It is really unclear whether they can handle this responsibility. A second problem is that, as I already showed in the timeline, there appears to be a constant monitoring of the compliance to the regulations, and as new products are also developed, you have to do it time and again. And the question is, who should do this? It was a bit of an ad hoc negotiation procedure, nothing structural or institutionalized in that. And well, I think that's difficult. You're always playing a catch-up game. Thirdly, the deal really does nothing about the whole problem of sphere transgression. It even makes it worse, might even make it worse unintendedly, because the GNM, the Google and Microsoft, have become even more trustworthy because they signed all these agreements. So, okay, buy their products. So it might have a side effect that's completely unintended, of course, that the dependency on these big tech companies becomes even bigger than it already is. Okay, my final slide is about outlook and discussion. So how should we proceed with this? I think there are two ways are open. The first is, well, go on with this negotiation path, but make it stronger and even better. Then you must be prepared to play this permanent catch-up game, let's say. Maybe better institutionalize the whole negotiation process and the control and monitoring of it. We can even strengthen the conditions and demands from the education sector. Perhaps a new EU law, the whole digital rulebook that's still being unfolded as we speak, can provide more leverage. You can put much more demand on, let's say, open data, open source, or prohibit the integration of all these products in one package, at least to insist on interoperability and data portability with other systems. This is all possible. But we can also step back and then maybe more connection to your talk, that we question whether the education sector can maintain this an acceptable degree of digital autonomy by this constant negotiation. Perhaps this whole dependency situation and the need to play a constant catch-up is simply not desirable. And then, of course, it is the question how to switch to alternative platforms and devices to create more than one, let's say, one supplier, but then more, let's say, different niches of products. And there's quite, also with the Trump administration, there's quite a lot of traction now on this issue. People are willing to listen to the message, but of course it's difficult because there are a lot of questions about them. Are all these alternatives of sufficient quality? Who will do the investment if they're not? Schools that have something in place do not want to do this whole process again. I mean, they are not, people working in schools are not trained for digital means. They want to educate children. And once they have, some infrastructure set, they don't want to go over the whole process again. Let's stick with the old stuff. And they don't, at the local level, you don't see these problems on that more play on the general level. So there's a kind of an action problem there. So how to help them and how to entice them to make different choices. Also in the Netherlands, that's a specific one, that's my final point, is that you have freedom of education. You cannot top down, let's say to the schools, now you have to use this platform or that platform. Every school has its own right and can decide on its own educational means and its own digital infrastructure it wants to use. As long as the children meet some end demands, that's the Dutch way of doing things. And in some other countries, there may be more options to come with top-down actions, but in the Netherlands, that's quite a challenge. Yeah, okay, so that's the main discussion. Go with strategy 1 and strengthen it, or should we go with strategy 2 or a mixture? I really am curious what you think about it. Thank you.
I was wondering, because it was a really new point to me that like schools would go with branding and branding themselves as a Microsoft school or branding themselves as an Apple school. And I was wondering how in Austria that would work, and I was also wondering how that is taken up in the Netherlands, how that is working as a strategy for like marketing, really.
Well, as said, there's a lot of freedom in the Netherlands to do this. So schools are simply allowed to do so. And we, at Rathenau, we talk to all stakeholders. So we also talk to the companies themselves. And I had a very interesting talk with people from Apple who say, okay, we have very good products. We don't do these strange privacy violations. We don't do it. We are the good ones. That's what they always say. But they also notice that if they don't train teachers to work properly with their products, it will be misused. So we step in a void that's left open by the public government. And that's a very interesting one, of course. And I think it is partly true, actually. So, but yeah, obviously they do this for different, they don't do this for, primarily for the improvement of quality of education. It's a market for them, and they want to increase their share and then bind people to them, and all these kinds of things. So, but yeah, it's very hard to stop this if you don't counter it with a good, active public agenda. They simply take over. I mean, yeah.
Thank you for now. It was a very insightful presentation.
So today, Mr. Comtas Stepanian and I will be discussing the new digital borders, cloud infrastructure, cybersecurity, and future of the sovereignty. So here is the outline of what we are going to talk about for the upcoming 20 minutes. And moving forward, today's our session will be focusing on the main provocative question, which is digital sovereignty truly achievable, or it's just a digital illusion maintained by our aspirations and geopolitical constraints?
Are we going to talk about politics? You are political leaders, or?
Not really, but as Brishmark said, if you are not doing politics, the politics is doing you. So maybe some part of the presentation may contain the political aspects. However, as the cloud platforms and big techs continue to develop and take over the dynamics of the reshaping global borders, so it's important to understand and answer the main question, where the sovereignty actually resides and who truly holds the power of the digital age nowadays.
And to find the answer for this question, I would like to ask you to take your smartphones. I'm pretty sure most of you have smartphones here with you, isn't it? That's great. Scan the QR code, and it's going to be 2 short quizzes. Actually, you didn't pay attention that it comes from the cybersecurity field, which is part of the overall topic we are discussing. This is fake QR, and imagine if we, just in a couple of seconds, manage to hack your phones, how big tech companies can hack our solidarity and sovereignty. But actually, this is the original QR. Move forward, yeah. And you didn't pay attention in the previous slide that there is something here. In every QR quiz, there should be some code here, and never scan the QR. It's better to use the code, but this is the original QR. May I ask you to switch the Menti? And there are 2 questions. Please scan the QR and answer the questions. And let's see what kind of opinion do we have in this small room. Here is, strongly agree. It's amazing. So we all think that cloud service providers, big tech companies are actually managing everything, including our sovereignty, isn't it? Let's move to the second question. Now you can see there is a second question in your phone. If it's not coming, you can scan the QR again. If using a cloud means sacrificing some natural controls. Control, I'm still okay with that. Anyone is okay with that? Strongly agree. Very good. Let's see. Let's continue to our presentation and see.
Okay, now let's have a historical shift to the past a little. Currently, the digital transformation of the 21st century that we are witnessing is often linked to the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. And by then, steel, railroads, and steam engines transformed the national power. And today, the same thing is happening. However, cloud infrastructures, data governance, and algorithmic influence are shaping the geopolitical dynamics and power of the nations. So, control over information systems has become the central of the modern governments. And unlike the physical borders, digital boundaries are intangible and oftentimes extraterritorially enforced. And that's what the paradox of the question is. So moving forward, the myth of the control. So governments around the world are racing to localize data within their territorial boundaries. In this way, many can confuse the data localization to the data sovereignty. So thus having data and cloud infrastructure within the borders of your country means ensuring sovereignty of the data. Let's take an example. Nowadays, 80% of the data is kept in the US-based, US-origin companies such as Google Cloud, Amazon, or Microsoft. And most of this data may be located within the cities like Frankfurt, Paris, or other European countries. However, based on the US Cloud Act, for instance, America is allowed to access to the data located in its companies, even if it's outside of its territory. So this means that we are just trying to anchor a ship to the sea itself. So not solving the question.
But it's interesting because yesterday we have witnessed an interesting presentation about Gaia X, which is an initiative and which Europe tried to manage all those questions. But do you think that Gaia X can really manage these big, giant companies? And our keynote speaker, Philip, mentioned that infrastructure is a key. What about infrastructure and data? Because infrastructure is like a car. What is your favorite car? It can be Ferrari in your garage. But a Ferrari without data, like Ferrari without fuel, is nothing. Ferrari is your infrastructure, but data is your current fuel. And currently, these giant companies, these big tech companies are managing both infrastructure and data.
And so most of the companies and dominating companies in the cloud market are led by the USA or China, which is, for example, in the West we have Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and in the side of China we have Alibaba Cloud, Tencent, and Huawei Cloud. So in these platforms are kept most of the government, hospital, financial institutions, and military information, and consequently, all of these infrastructure depend on these cloud infrastructures. So moving forward, now let's give parallels between these sovereignty models of the countries and within the countries. Starting with the European Union, the approach of the European Union is more regulatory, right-based, and interoperable. A good example is Gaia X, when the countries within the European Union are trying to keep the interoperability and sovereignty of the technology within the democratic principles. However, on the other hand, we have China, which is by contrast enforcing strict data localization, censorship, and centralized leading of the data and infrastructure by the government itself. So here we are having the centralized power and control over digital flows as a way of interpretation of sovereignty. And then we have Russia, which is following the digital fortress model, which is decoupling from the global internet and building isolated systems. In this way, trying to ensure the independence and continuity of the regime and the stability, of course. These differing approaches are interpretation of the sovereignty, however, are not merely technical, and they mostly reflect the ideology and power about the autonomy, governance, and cyberspace each country or region has. So these aren't just policy choices, these are more reflect of the ideologies of the government and risk and power each of these countries and regions want and see. So let's ask a question. Is it digital solidarity or dependency in this case?
That's a good question, actually. Let's look what's happening in the world right now. A prime example is Ukraine. Like, when you look at the past couple of years, we have seen that the United States supported Ukraine to easily and peacefully move to cloud. But currently, what kind of message we are getting from White House that just recently Donald Trump mentioned we might not support Ukraine not only in a kinetic war, but in a cyberspace. Now imagine what can happen with Ukraine if they just shut down the Amazon Web Services or Azure or I don't know, Google, and the entire governmental services is running from cloud. Now imagine the country will be just disappear from the digital space, if not from the earth overall, because they cannot literally survive. This is a very important question, and we need to be very careful when we are talking about digital solidarity, and sometimes it can be clear dependency. As soon as we have support from big countries, we need to be very careful if we do not deeply connected and we become dependent from that countries.
Okay. So, as an example of dependency or sovereignty, let's discuss the case of Ukraine that we recently had. After the 2022, American companies such as Amazon Web Services and Google helped to relocate Ukraine's critical digital infrastructure and data to the cloud services that they're providing. So this ensured, of course, redundancy, security, and operational continuity as the positive side effects of these cloud infrastructures. However, on the other hand, here more questions can arise. Could this model be sustained without constant Western and in particular US involvement? And when it comes to the political alignments and questions or crises between the countries, can this neutrality be kept or not? So, as we can see from this case, the resilience and dependency are often two sides of the coin, and in particular what we witnessed in the case of Ukraine.
This once again comes to prove that digital dependency can highly influence to your country independency. So once again, as soon as we have giant companies like cloud infrastructure companies, and not only, but the countries like United States, and if we support you to move cloud, to deal with your cybersecurity risks in the cyberspace, and once if this inter-country trust violated, it can completely influence to your country's digital sovereignty, and it can harm your country in the long run.
So here where we have the paradox of sovereignty and have questions about interoperability, resilience, and alliance. Nations that want control but also want interoperability and global integration in this case. So we are having a closed system that can protect sovereignty but isolate innovation.
Yeah, interoperability versus control. There are countries who are trying to control everything, like Russia, China, but they have closed systems and they cannot operate freely with free Europe, with other countries. But on the other hand, if you have open systems, sometimes you can be vulnerable to other influencers, which can create national level security risks.
Okay, and in this question, what does the future look like?
Future looks like something like this, very blurred. We have the world map, we have two hegemon countries, China and Russia. And where is Europe here? Europe is somewhere here. Where is Europe? Come here. Technology is not working good enough. Europe is somewhere here when we are comparing with cloud infrastructure, cloud capacity and capability of the entire world. Unfortunately, Europe is not scaling up good enough to deal with these risks overall in the world, because as Mario already mentioned, cloud companies all over the world are like sharing more than 50% of infrastructure, and I know only like 1 or 2 cloud companies worldwide known, like Oracle Cloud. They have like 1 to 1 to 2.2% of shares, or I don't know, some other small cloud companies which are really, to be honest, let me say this, shame for Europe, because we are not dealing. I'm considering myself, my country, as part of at least the European philosophy, but it's really a shame that we are really behind of these big giant companies who are ruling the world. Let's continue.
Okay, but now, while discussing this topic, let's bring a historical parallel. We might remember that when Microsoft Windows was becoming the dominant operating system, which is US corporation company, there were a lot of concerns about the security and continuity of the processes that were relying on these systems. Governments, ministers, utilities, and even defense systems were running on this corporation and system. And by then we had a hypothetical question: what if one day Microsoft or US decides to revoke licenses or push intrusive updates?
Actually, that's a great question and a great parallel. In fact, when Microsoft tries to revoke your license, it's not the end of the life, because your data is still at your hand. You can just migrate your data from one system, one server to another. But in case of cloud, everything is someone's computer. Everything, the entire infrastructure, including data, is managed by someone else. And in case of political tensions, in case of different types of conflicts, it can really happen. It's a very vivid risk, and it's not just a theoretical. Let's look at what's happening right now in Europe. You can see 2 countries' names in this map, and like Hungary is supporting somehow Russian and EU countries are not happy with this. And just a couple of days ago, German new chancellor mentioned that we are going to cut the EU funds for Slovakia. So small nation in Europe, because they are also somehow, I don't know, cooperating with Russia. And if we look at these perspectives, from the open sources, I found that even if we are talking about the global hegemon cloud service providers, you can see the EU countries where AWS, Microsoft, and Google, they have their cloud infrastructure. You cannot find Hungary or Slovakia name here. Imagine now they are using a data center which is located in Germany. And Germany, with this political tension, if they decide not to allow Slovakia to use their own infrastructure, it can create a huge problem for them. And moving to the next, and I guess this either final or the previous slide,
So here we are getting to the key question. Can small nations negotiate with the hyperscalers to ensure true data sovereignty?
Unfortunately, I don't believe they can. My country is also a small country, small nation, and we are not able to deal with this global hyperscaler. And they are managing infrastructure, they are managing our data, and unfortunately, they are influencing our sovereignty. Actually, this is almost the final slide, and we have just 1 minute. Mari, the final question.
So, who holds the power?
That's the question we need to think about. I would love to, once again, come back to the first keynote speech. And you mentioned that infrastructure is the key. I would like to highlight not only infrastructure, but also data. Who is managing your data? And if those companies are managing both infrastructure and data, we need to think twice before using some kind of services. Thanks so much. It was our short presentation. We'll be happy to have your questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. As before, there is now a chance for immediate questions for our two presenters. Yes, I will run over to you 1 second.
Sir? Okay.
I only want to say, as I have worked many years for Telekom Austria and making their the tech public relation, the network public relation, that it's only half of the truth that all the infrastructure is owned by platform providers. There are many others who made in sum up the internet, like providers of internet connections, telecom operators, companies who owns undersea cable or satellite links and things like that. And then you have to differentiate how you compose internet where beside the authoritarian states, all other states can work together and have a single fantasy of what should be the really issue for a connected world.
Excuse me, is the comment or what was the question?
It's a comment.
Yeah.
My question.
I agree with this comment.
My question was, that is only half true, that only the platform providers.
Completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. We had just 20 minutes, otherwise I would love to touch that question as well. Thanks so much.
Maybe we can bring that question into the follow-up discussion later. Any other immediate questions? If not, yes?
Thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. I have just one question regarding, let's say, control of data with respect to cloud infrastructure. So have you in your research looked at this, or do you have in general any idea on how about complementing these strategic choices with very specific policy or security mechanisms and mitigation strategies? So it's not that we just let our data go to these hyperscalers or whatever, but maybe we can adopt from a security perspective very specific measures such as, I don't know, localization of cryptographic keys or where activities of cryptography, if encryption and decryption occur, so that even if data is lost, etc., it's not plain data, so we still have somehow retention of the integrity and availability or even confidentiality of it somehow.
Thank you so much. It's a great question. Actually, it's part of my passion. I'm really interested in these topics. Yesterday, we have heard a very nice presentation about quantum computing. And you are talking about cryptography. Cryptography is one of the key controls to not trust cloud service providers. Like you are encrypting your data, you are putting it in a cloud drive, and then you may say, I have a cryptography. But the first question is here, who is the owner of your cryptographic keys? Like, if you rely on American companies like Amazon or Microsoft is also an American company. If you go to buy a cryptographic keys from another American company, then what is the difference? not trust to Amazon, but trust another company who is giving your cryptographic keys. But if you have a national cryptographic algorithm and national cryptographic keys, it can be a solution. But on the other hand, imagine now you have your entire data encrypted by your own cryptographic keys, and it's in the Amazon cloud. Imagine I have somehow that data, even encrypted. I can keep it and wait until the quantum computers will become available, and like after 5 or 10 or maybe 15 years, I'll be able to hack your cryptography. And if there is a secret information there, very sensitive, then after even 10 years, or maybe some information can be valuable even after 20 years, 50 years.
That doesn't depend on cloud infrastructure.
It doesn't depend on cloud infrastructure. It doesn't depend. You are correct.
Okay, thank you very much for now. I would suggest we move on to our third presentation for today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, very happy to be here, and I think my presentation will follow very nicely from everything that has been said so far. I will be focusing more on how the EU is constructing its idea of digital sovereignty. So we have been discussing a lot and hearing a lot about this concept. It was primarily pushed forward already in the early 2000s by German and French politicians and scholars, and it increasingly became part of the political speech in the EU. For example, and very prominently by Ursula von der Leyen in 2019 in her political guidelines before she took over the European Commission presidency. We then saw digital sovereignty become a core objective for the digital decade of the European Union 2020 to 2030. And eventually in the new European Commission that started now late 2024 and 2025, there was a new position, that of an executive vice president of tech sovereignty, security and democracy. And that kind of captures how the EU sees digital sovereignty, but I would like to go a little bit deeper to deconstruct this concept. So I would first like to explain how this is used and what it means, go into the resulting policy and regulation changes we have been seeing as a result of this speech on digital sovereignty, and then kind of dig a little bit deeper into what are the challenges. We already hear a lot of questions about, can we actually attain digital sovereignty or data sovereignty, and then kind of pivot a little bit the perspective. If it's not about digital sovereignty, then what is it about? And to explain that, I use quantum technologies, and I'm so happy we had the introductory panels yesterday, so I don't have to explain what quantum tech is. So, digital sovereignty has come to be an umbrella term. It's very vague, it's very contextual, it's very contested. It can mean something entirely different when it comes from an indigenous community and when it comes from the European Union. The power dynamics are obviously entirely different. I'm focusing on the state-like actors, and we can see that in very broad terms, digital sovereignty has come to encompass data and technological sovereignty. It is about reclaiming control over data, infrastructures, and technologies. It is about self-determination and autonomy. This is how the EU has been also using this term. It's about our capacity to make our own choices based on our own values, respecting our own rules, and protecting ourselves. How are we going to do that? Well, that depends very much on developing critical, strategic, so-called key enabling technologies. These include artificial intelligence, robotics, cloud computing, but also quantum technologies. And to do that, there are two core themes. One is investment. We need money to develop tech. And the other thing is normativity. It's about promoting our own values as the global norm. We also heard it yesterday. It's about becoming the global norm setter. Digital sovereignty, as I mentioned, is not really defined in legal documents, but a very broad idea of what it is. It has been codified as a core objective to achieve digital sovereignty in an open manner. It is never really explained what is this openness. We heard previously, can we achieve openness whilst ensuring security? What does it mean to be digitally sovereign in an open manner? It very broadly covers elements according to this Digital Decade Policy Program. It entails supply chains, resilience of supply chains, innovation, developing secure, sovereign, accessible digital infrastructures, strong manufacturing digital sector, competitiveness and sustainability, and access to the global markets. To do that, again, we need a strong coordination policy, so we have the normative element and public and private investment. So even though the discussion on digital sovereignty has become even more prominently the last years, let's say, there has been a change, a shift in policy for quite a while and regulation, and this has been documented by several authors. Core changes that we see and core regulation that we see resulting from this ambitious goal of digital sovereignty relates, as I mentioned, to these elements of funding, values, security. So when it comes to funding, it's about funneling European funds towards specific technologies, aiding through less strict state aid rules, but also controlling what type of investment comes into the EU. So we have stronger, stricter foreign direct investment screening rules. It's very much about security, cybersecurity, as we heard before, cyber defense, military space strategies, but also export controls that we also heard about yesterday. Export controls don't only relate to the military civil the applications, but it's broadly about controlling what type of knowledge and tech is leaving the EU to other countries. So then it also has implications with who we are collaborating as researchers as well. And then we have value-based regulation that has been very strong, the AI Act, GDPR. We also heard the discussions yesterday, should we deregulate, should we regulate more? This is an ongoing discussion, but the main EU agenda has been to be the global norm setter, we need to regulate strictly. And when it comes to infrastructure, we also try to invest into local materials, developing certain materials locally, and that could include semiconductors, which is a very important backbone of all the technologies we have, and critical raw materials. However, the challenges are many, from very theoretical to very practical. One element is legitimacy. This is a union of states. It comprises of different states with different values and different capacities, different economies, different industrial backgrounds. Internally, for an actor to claim sovereignty, they need to be legitimized by those appointing authority to it, and this is the citizens. Does the EU have this power given its pooled sovereignty rather than a standalone sovereignty? On the other hand, sovereignty has to be recognized. Classical state sovereignty was about the creation of states in the Westphalian treaties and other states recognizing that you're a state. Not all states were recognized. So just claiming sovereignty is not alone. It's not enough in itself. We heard about the paradoxes and the illusion of control. Do we have any control, actually? The Brussels effect, it's a very fancy term. We like to use it, but does it actually work? We also heard Mike Schrems yesterday about the non-enforceability and the long-term saga of trying to make the US companies respect our data protection rules. This is constantly renegotiated. So our actually being a global norm setter is far from being achieved. And the global interdependencies of supply chains, we actually, in many critical materials, are very highly dependent on third countries, and the legal instruments such as the CHIPS Act, they're still very far from actually developing autonomous materials within the EU. So a strand of literature has started to examine digital sovereignty as a discourse, as a discursive and performative practice that actually is not about digital sovereignty. It is maybe about constructing a socio-technical imaginary. And this is a term that comes from science and technology studies. I'm not going to go into it, but it's kind of the idea of trying to construct your own identity and future by linking together society and technology. And perhaps we can see that the EU, through this discourse and through this policy, is trying to present itself as this third option, the human rights alternative between US and China. And at the same time, it's conditioning that to technological progress. Societal welfare is translated to tech advancement. So that has led several scholars, and I built on their work, that has started to discuss about the legitimizing role of digital sovereignty. If it might not be entirely or not so much about autonomy, control, reducing dependencies, what does it do? What is its work, the work that it does? It might be also about legitimizing other policy objectives. For example, it might be about making stricter export controls that are part of the broader geopolitics and the games between EU and US and China. And to make this a little bit more concrete, I now go into the example of quantum tech. So I'm not going to explain what it is. I myself don't always understand what it is. What I think we need to know is that one of them, quantum sensing, is an application that is closer to being implemented now, but it's primarily military. That's where the most use cases come from. Quantum computing could be 10, 15, 50 years. No idea. We don't know how we will build a quantum computer yet, and we don't know exactly what it will do. It will be better in some applications, but a lot of question marks. That comes from scientists, not myself. And the last one is also quantum communication. There have been a lot of advancements in a low scale of creating an autonomous, secure network, but still a lot of question marks as to its scalability, commercialization, and so on. Still, in EU policy, and especially the last 5 years, quantum tech is a star. It will bring ginormous change. It will change our lives. It will make Europe winners. We heard it also yesterday. We've lost the race to AI, but we can still win this one. And it will transform our society. It will bring us societal self-determination, competitiveness in our businesses, new markets, high-quality jobs. It will do a lot. To do that, of course, we need to have funding. And in the grand scheme of things, 7 billion euro is not the biggest funding in technology. Yet, Europe is very proud to be second in the world after China in public investment. That 7 billion euro is combined public-private, but it is primarily more public. It gets funneled through research projects that I mentioned also earlier. We see how it is being promoted very heavily in primarily security strategies. There are already in place both national and European export controls that relate to both the materials, but also these so-called qubits on which quantum computers are meant to work. Digital sovereignty and quantum tech is also very much interlinked by this use of language that is normative. It's about the societal impact. It's also about partnerships with like-minded countries, and that is a quote. And there, of course, we see US, India, Japan, and other countries, and that is something, at least that changes a lot. And we also see efforts to standardize through this global cooperation quantum technology already. Challenges. First of all, geopolitical. To develop quantum tech, we still rely very heavily on several materials. For example, it's 6 critical dependencies across 17 key technologies, according to the Draghi report. We're also lagging very much behind in private investment. So the idea is we still need to put a lot of money to be able to see that scientific breakthrough. Furthermore, there are question marks regarding the governance instruments that we are seeing. There is a lot of focus on these policy documents on quantum computers, even though those are the most uncertain of the technologies and the most uncertain of the quantum technologies that could be considered critical in the now. There is, for example, even though quantum sensing is already applicable, we see it almost not at all in policy documents. There are concerns that we're already going too far or too fast in trying to regulate through standardization or export controls, for example, of a technology that is still very immature, which could actually hinder innovation by trying to restrict as much. And then there is the questionable unanimity of values. That is also on the geopolitical realm. These like-minded countries could be something that constantly changes depending on elections, but also within the much more niche ecosystem of quantum technology, actors who go into it might have very different perspectives, from the military to the societal impact or the health applications. The interest of factors aligning here could vary very much. So we can maybe talk about the legitimizing role of digital sovereignty in the quantum space. It is, again, a way to construct the EU as the next winner. It is, though, reinforcing select European actors. If we see the actors in, for example, the Eurostack, which is a very prominent policy document in European politics, the companies that are mentioned are primarily French and German. 1/3 of them, or more, I think, is French and German. I was recently in a conference where we had countries like Czech Republic talking about how can we compete internally within the EU with these big states. The securitization of technology and knowledge, these are primarily the measures we see, and they might, as I mentioned, actually hinder innovation and limit the sharing of knowledge, and as a result, limiting actually science through export controls or standardization. And ultimately, we could question if what is promoted is more techno-solutionism rather than solutions that come from the people and for the people. We heard yesterday, for example, that society has to be convinced that quantum is good for them so as not to reject quantum. And okay, I can understand that given how difficult quantum is to understand, we might need for sure some explanation to understand the potential. But maybe we should also start by what society actually needs in order to advance and be this societal welfare. So to conclude, digital sovereignty is a term that can serve as an anchor during turbulent times. It invokes power, autonomy, ideas that everybody can go behind, but that also means that very different interests will be served, and then perhaps the most dominant ones are the ones who will win the most. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for your presentations. Are there any immediate questions? No immediate questions? Okay, I have a brief one, because I was wondering, you had these 3 dimensions of the funding and the normativity and also the security, and you laid this out for like quantum technology, but I assume this is kind of a triangle that applies to all kinds of technologies being pushed. And I was wondering, how do these balance each other out, or does it happen that trade-offs need to happen, and how does this play out in the case of quantum technologies?
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. I do think these are also a trend and a pattern that we see also for like semiconductors, AI, and so on. There is no discussion of trying to balance them at the moment, but it is interesting because we promote quantum, for example, as a threat and the solution, there is this idea of quantum encryption solutions that are also all primarily security involved. So security is the main driver. So there is a very big disconnect between the military security motivation and applications and the very, very vague societal element ultimately. I think we also heard it a little bit yesterday, that how can we make sure that this will not be just confined in the military? There is yet no efforts, and perhaps that is why there are several people who want to already regulate this. So this is now missing still.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well then I will kick off the discussion. It was very interesting to hear from all of you, and all of you kind of spoke a bit about the role of the state in something that is very dominant. What can the state do? What can the state not do? What are other opportunities? There's regulation, there is negotiation. And I kept getting confused about, is there a good way forward? And if there is, which one is it? And I would like to pose these questions to each and every one of you. So who would like to start?
Well, in my presentation, there are two strategies, right? So the one is relying on the private sector and, let's say, do catch-up, and the other one is get more public grip on cloud services, for example. So I was struck by your presentation that you said we are like tied down. We cannot go. We are so dependent on these big tech companies already. But there are alternatives. There is this Nextcloud, for example, open source cloud from Germany. There are other types of cloud services. So why do you feel so tied down? Are these alternatives not working for you, or maybe you can elaborate a bit on that?
Sure, but let's start from your question, the original question. Actually, what states can do, states can apply law or regulation. This is the main role of the state. But from my opinion, any law or regulation without proper implementation and supervision, like you need to be sure that your law is really working. Because if law is not working, it's just a piece of paper. Like you have a law that US companies need to do something according to your regulation or law, okay? But they do not do. What kind of force you have, what kind of power you have in your hand? And according to US law, if Amazon or other cloud providers, they have their own data centers in EU countries, US still have access to the data, which is your data. And you have law, okay? You have law and you have regulation. Without proper international contracts, which if I'm not a politician once again, and I'm not a psychology as well, and to be honest, I don't trust international law because we have seen right now what's happening in the world. We have lots of international law, human rights, lots of things which are not working right now, which is happening right now. Coming back to your question or your challenge, I agree with you, but let's compare with the scale. Can you compare those EU cloud service providers with the big giant US cloud service providers? It's not comparable. It's like 1 to 100 or even more.
Okay, and also I think to the point it's also important cooperation and on the one hand cooperation, on the other hand building and increasing the capacity of the nation of own resources. So in case of needed having that sovereignty and independence of the giants and other hegemonies operating in the field.
My pessimistic perspective is that it's about the scaling. To have cloud that is nationwide and to have data localization, you need data centers, you need materials. I think we will hear more about it in the next sessions. That means extractivism. We have to face this reality. This has quite a burden on the environment, on labor. Is Europe ready to do that itself? And maybe that would mean less functionalities, less AI, less tech. Is that desirable? Maybe, but that would be my perspective.
If I may add a little more, actually, if we think in that way that each and every country or EU can build everything by their own, like what's about open society? I don't know, whatever we were like thinking in the last 15 years. We are going back to Cold War. Like each and every state or country is doing everything for their own, to be self-sufficient, to manage everything by their own. Is it achievable for long run? Maybe yes, if you have like 50 years country strategy to have everything in your country. But what about small nations? Once again, on our presentation, we are stressing the capability of small nations. I'm talking from my country's perspective. Can we like deal with the cybersecurity right now? Can we deal with the quantum AI, those risks? Can small nations be ready and deal with countries like US or China? That's a question.
No. That's why I say internal collaboration, and it's not about competing. It's about making something alternative. And if we can think about the local and the indigenous, that sounds amazing, but I wouldn't know how. That's why I was wondering why did some parts of it declined to also learn how to sustain this type of alternative dreams.
I see we have a question. There you go.
Well, it's a question and a comment, basically. I coming from a small country, Austria myself, I think that, yes, small countries like, for instance, indigenous communities in Canada can develop their own kind of version or form of digital sovereignty, but of course it's necessary to find partnerships and alliances. And the European Union is an alliance of different countries where the larger countries like Germany or France are a little more powerful than others for, I think, good reasons. And the problem that I see, I'm also not a politician and of course no political scientist, but you know, if we don't look or listen to what people on the ground have to say, like, you know, referring to this, you mentioned the term techno-solutionism, then we will lose them. The nation states will lose them and the European Union will lose them, and you can see that already in election results. So the European Union is maybe at a critical moment in time, and it's, I think, very important to listen what people actually need. Do they need quantum communication? I don't know. Do they need health, education, secure water? I'm pretty sure they do. And this, you know, talking about cybersecurity, digital sovereignty is all fine, but we should not forget about the context where, you know, the actual situation people live in. Was no question.
That was a remark.
May I comment on your comment? I agree with you, but I think it's very theoretical, having alliances. Once again, let me stress this moment once again. We have seen a very good cooperation between US and Ukraine. Until Trump became to the office of White House to become president. And he just overnight said, we are not going to support Ukraine anymore. Before that, the entire world was looking how good is this cooperation is going on. just in my presentation, I would love even to switch the YouTube small short video where the German chancellor is talking about Slovakia, a small nation in Ukraine, in EU. And he mentioned that we are going to cut the financing of Slovakia, EU country. But we are talking alliances, which are very nice. In fact, sometimes it cannot work.
There are rules and regulations, and if you don't follow them, you have to take the consequences.
Completely on that.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Think of it as a family.
Speaking of a family, NATO will be gathering in The Hague, where I work, in a few weeks' time. And Trump will be there, and Zelensky will be there. Putin will not be there. I mean, there are still possibilities that even the Trump administration is going to continue to support Ukraine. I mean, it's very volatile what they actually want. It's not a final call yet. That's one point. Another point is that given the contextual remark, I think it's not an either-or question whether you should go for big tech solutions or alternative solutions. I think it's a mix, and I think it's more about diversification, right? If you look at a sector like education sector, maybe we can create specific infrastructure or specific platforms that are not big tech, maybe some big tech. I mean, maybe if you have widen it up, and that is what this I think panel also helps to think more about, is that the digital sovereignty concept is a very layered concept with a lot of still ways to interpret it are still not so clear. I mean, there are not too many definitions of digital sovereignty, and they're quite recent. And the few talks here made me realize that it is depends a lot on what, who, why, how you interpret the concept. And I think a lot of extra work is needed. But the key message is that if it is such a complex concept, the reply, also the practical reply, should be a very diverse one.
Thank you very much. I fear that we have reached the end of our time slot, but I'm very happy that we did indeed spark quite a discussion. You're very welcome to continue these over lunch. Thank you very much. Thank you.